We just want to talk about what we saw and experienced during the Beryllium release as far as the infrastructure went, system tests, and the distribution. So I'm counting on these guys to help me out here. So there you go.
The tough questions.
Yeah, and this needs to be a discussion because we had problems and we want to fix the problems. So I can't see that very well. The high-level items that we experienced, we had long job queues. We had unresponsiveness. There's lots of IRCs to Thanh, like, hey, Jenkins is down. And it's hard to track. This is one of Lewis's bullet points, right? So we want to be able to track a job failure all the way back down to the merge that created the problem. And it's not so easy. Another thing we had to deal with was the software we run on these VMs. It's constantly changing and they're requesting new software, and we end up with extra VMs and more maintenance for the Linux Foundation folks. We need a better way to do that. One good example is OVS. We have version 2.0 that we want 2.4 sometimes, or 2.3 sometimes. And then we had just problems on Rackspace side, right? So they had bugs. I know Thanh was on the phone a lot with them. So maybe the private cloud or whatever is going to fix that. So what are we doing about these things? Like the long job queue, is that fixed by Zool and Nodepool?
Yes and no.
What are we going to do? Where's my mouse? I'm going to try to take notes while we talk. I know one problem is we trigger CSIT jobs which use a lot of resources on every patch that gets merged, right? Even on Yang tools, and we're triggering an OpenFlow plugin job. Like, do we need to do that?
The biggest ones are the ODL parent, Yang tools, MDSal, and controller, because every project depends on all of those. And at the moment, when any of those projects merge a patch, 80 jobs get viewed.
Yeah.
For every merge, right? So if someone merges 5 patches, we easily get several hundred.
But we can't scale that, right? So we got to stop.
So we need to decide more smartly which project should actually trigger. So like, for example, the integration job. Do we really need 50 projects to report that ODL parent merge broke the world?
Yeah, right. No.
Maybe we can pick like 3 or 4.
Stop with the first one.
Yeah, or maybe just build the offset 1 projects and then.
So yeah, by offset, I think we talked about that. So we're not going to trigger offset 3 projects on Yang tools.
Yeah.
And so,
I think, yeah.
oh, there you go. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks.
So, well, that requires us to go through each JJB folder and figure out who's doing what and where, and there's no easy way, right? Just work.
So the easy way is probably offset, no? That you said, starting with offsets.
Yeah. So for example, like if ODL parent merges, then we only build offset 0 projects, and then if they don't build, obviously the other projects probably won't, right? And for example, if an offset 1 project merges, then maybe we only test other offset 1 projects that depend on that one, and so forth down the chain.
But you're saying in the happy path, we're triggering even offset 3 on Yang tools?
Yeah.
So today, if Yang tools merges,
Controller.
it triggers controller MDSal,
Yeah,
and
now.
then it goes all the way down the chain.
But are we saying to stop doing that, or are we saying be smarter about only trigger if we succeed?
What I mean is like only trigger, for example, if Yang tools merges, then we'll only trigger like a few other projects,
Right.
rather than the entire world.
And then we're done. Okay.
Because we don't need the entire world to figure out if something broke the build, right? Like
Okay.
only a few projects breaking obviously would probably mean other projects broke too.
All right.
Yeah, but to be sure of the patch, you need to build everything. I mean,
Right, and
there are cases where an ODL parent change. Yeah. There are cases where an ODL parent change will break something for a few projects on offset 2. So if you stop at offset 0, you won't see that. But maybe we can do build offset 0. If that works, then build offset 1. And if that works, build offset 2. But in most cases, that still means you'll build everything.
Yeah.
So it doesn't fix anything. But wasn't there something that you changed recently where documentation changes or, what was it, certain types of changes don't trigger everything?
So my most recent one was for Maven sites. So I think it was Maven sites. So like auto release.
Auto release.
So it because auto release testing only makes sense if the POM changed. If you only change code, then there's no value running auto release because it's checking to see if your versions are in line. But if you only changed code, there's no versions to check. So.
Well, I think for now, let's just take the CSIT jobs and get rid of anything that's not one offset beneath it. Like Nick,
Right.
we're not going to trigger off Yang tools.
Right.
And we'll just go through and that'll help right away.
So another thing we could potentially do is pick a few projects from each offset, right? Like if ODL parent merges and we want to make sure that it goes all the way down, maybe the right thing is just say like maybe we'll test 4 or 5 projects in 1, 2, and we probably have to think of that. I don't know any offhand, but I would imagine there would be pretty decent ones to try, right?
Okay. We got something to do. That's good. And I wrote it down so you can do it.
Yeah, and same with the CSIT ones, right? Like
That's really what
we
I
don't need to trigger 60 CSIT jobs.
Right. Right. Yeah, we got to fix that. So,
Yeah.
Jenkins is unresponsive. Node pool's fixing that. Zool's fixing that. How's that?
Well, it'll help quite a bit.
Okay, because we're not going to be looking at Jenkins anymore, right? Most of us.
Yeah.
I probably will, but. Okay, so nothing to do there. Difficult to track resources. Louis, did you want to talk about that?
That's probably something we can improve with the SUL, right? We can control more dashboard resources. This is more like infra utilization, no? That we don't know. I don't know you guys as an internal, understanding of what are the resources in use. But externally, there is no really metrics for that you can see, right?
Yeah, I want to see a job just failed right now, and I want to be able very quickly to find out it was.
Well, that's another issue.
A patch in.
See, you see there, 0.3 is more like when you have continuous integration, you want to monitor your resources, VMs, CPUs, and that visibility, at least the normal user, we don't have. And the other one is, point number 4 is actually all the control of the CI sequence from the merge to all the tests that are happening after. It's very difficult to go and track things forward and backwards. Like when you see an error in a test, what was the patch that caused this error? Or the other way around. I mean, some people want to test a patch or merge a patch. I mean, what are all the tests that are done after this? And make sure that they are all passing. They're very difficult to track these things. There is something called the patch, patch test job.
Yep.
So that's when you have more control because it's holding. You have a main job that is not finishing until you run all the tests. And at the end of the job, you get a report or these are all my tests and so on. But you cannot hold all this system just in normal continuous integration.
So we don't like it. Can we fix it?
So this is something that I was thinking SUL maybe could be useful for the second issue and also for the first issue, and I'm not sure.
So one of the things that I did not exactly cover with Zool in my overview this morning is that Zool, unfortunately, while it calls everything pipelines, does not actually pipeline.
Liar.
Zool does everything in parallel, and it only triggers off of Garrett triggers right now. So a change in Garrett triggers these things, and that's all it does. And they can be executed in parallel. That's it. Which is obviously a problem for us because we do a lot of downstream-based triggering. I've been looking at and trying to figure out how we can actually fix that. Right now, there's only 2 options that I can think of. One is that we extend Zool, should be relatively simple. It's written in Python. The quick fix right now would be that we basically inject back into the queue that Zool is managing from Jenkins. The problem with that is that we then have to code our jobs that are triggering to also report to Garrett, because as soon as that job is triggered outside of Zool, Zool just doesn't know about it.
So we just got to wait and see how it feels?
It's a work in progress.
Okay.
Now, we're obviously just moving into Zool now, so there are definitely going to be warts that we don't know about until we encounter them.
When are we getting this?
We will not start moving into Zool until we actually have brought the infrastructure into the private cloud. So
It's a month, like,
at least a month.
yeah. Okay. That's all right. Cool. So we'll wait and see on that one. Cloud infra instabilities. We had the neutron port stuck issue that they've hacked a fix for, right? So we don't have to worry about that. What's the other one? Oh, the spin-up scripts. We're still going to need those, right? And if they sometimes just stop working, we're still going to run into the same issues.
So with the way node pool operates, it's basically Vagrant plus our spin-up scripts. The difference is that the spin-up, the final spin-up script has to basically exit clean before it will even attach the slave to Jenkins, which is different from what we currently get with JClouds, where JClouds brings online the system, and as soon as it can connect to it, it connects in and starts to spin up scripts. But because it's now responding, it goes, oh, and connects it to Jenkins.
Okay. So with node pool, this problem is fixed.
It should be fixed as soon as we move to node pool.
Okay, that's
But we
cool.
can't move to node pool until we move to Zool.
Which is at least a month. Damn. Okay. Cool. All right, CSID analysis. Tomorrow we have an hour to really go over this stuff, but this is kind of like a one bullet slide or a one slide. We didn't see a lot of this in the beginning of Beryllium, but at the end, I think we have 3 to 4 projects now that are having to tweak their test depending on the version of the controller. And we only have master branch and system test repo. So we can't like check out lithium and do lithium tests. It's not that hard to get over it right now, but it might get harder and harder. We might want to think of a new solution. Right now, what they do is we get the ODL controller version on the command line, and we can just base our test variables on that. And right now, it's like 2 variables for these guys, but it could get worse. I don't know if anybody has any creative idea to make that better besides using branches. We did used to have branches, and all we did was cherry pick the exact same code. And it was just overhead that we didn't want to deal with. And now we realize maybe there is a good reason.
Yeah, I think the idea to go to master was exactly that. We're maintaining a lot of replicated code. So going back to having branches, I'm not sure. The other thing could be we need to have probably more documentation on how to do these things, because whenever these are happening in the community, like someone asking, it's like we are probably sending some recommendations, some kind of writing up. But I think in the end, there are good ways to do this, using only master. One of the things we did for SFC was, on some other projects, is to use the test plan. No? You just create different test plan for one other release.
Yeah.
The test plan identifies what is in the test. Sometimes if it is very small kind of thing that you are modifying from one release to another, you could do something in the system test, using a variable or something. And then by using this variable and passing the version, you could also do that.
So we can use folder structures to have different tests for different versions, but like SFC just has the same script, and then it's an endpoint, right? It's changing an endpoint from one thing to another based on the version, so that's not difficult, but...
Yeah.
All right, folder structures.
I mean, for a few tests that I think are, or a few projects that today they have this issue that they change from one release to another, the same kind of feature. Because normally features shouldn't change much. You are backward compatible and everything. You shouldn't be changing much your feature from one release to another. It's more than you introduce a new feature. But I think it's worth it to write up something or describe well in the wikis how to do this.
Okay, wiki.
It's a guide, the system test step-by-step guide. That seems like a good entry point for.
Yeah, okay, that needs to go on the wiki. I'll make sure somebody does that.
Wasn't that important?
Okay. What else? Too many CSUPs. Okay, we talked about that. We need more documentation. So I mean, we have these Maven sites now. So we get our robot libraries just automatically created, and we'll just publish them to the Maven site. That's already an action item we have for the team. We need better wikis or not? Do you? I mean, I point people to the wikis all the time, and if it's there, so we should sit down and figure out what more stuff to add.
Especially now that we are starting the release, we need to look at and work more on documentation. So
Yep.
that when the project gets to a point that they need to read those wikis to generate system tests or whatever, it needs to be all updated. So we have two issues today with the documentation. We need to review the existing documentation that is properly updated, and we will need to change that because of the no pool and SUL now.
Yeah.
And then there is documentation that is not even there. Like I just mentioned one example before, but there are more examples I can think missing documentation basically.
Okay. Tomorrow when we go through the Trello board, we can put
we can go
proper
there.
cards there for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Unstable test cases make the patch test job unusable. So we have the patch test job, which will run all of our system tests. And then you click and you see a bunch of yellow and red, and you're like, okay, whatever. I don't know what happened. So what's the point? Like, we're just wasting resources. It's a really cool job because it takes your patch, it's not merged, and it will build a distribution, and it'll run all the system tests. That's great. But if you don't care that something failed, if you're not looking, then it's pointless. So I think we need everybody to have better system tests. Like, they should be passing, and if they're failing because of a real bug, and they should run the patch test job and maybe see one job that failed, not 19. So that is something I'm going to lobby for tomorrow in the talk just about system tests.
I think that specific point about expecting projects to be green and not just failing intermittently for the system test is already written up in the lessons learned for Beryllium as well. So from a sort of high level project point of view, other people not in integration who are writing tests and stuff, we're going to be essentially demanding that in this next release.
Yeah, trying to.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no easy way to track system test coverage. And this is like, why don't we have a single dashboard landing page that shows me all the jobs? Like, I just want to see, how did it look yesterday? And we don't. Right now you got to click through each project and then search for the string CSET, and you don't get a good idea until we run the patch test job, and then it fails anyway. So,
You can always hit the CSIT tab.
I know. It's still, you can't tell. Like, you can't go, what did that job, or what did that build give me for all the CSIT jobs? You know what I mean? So dashboard, we'll talk about this tomorrow too, but the same thing would apply to performance numbers and scale. Like, I want one place to go look and find it. So I don't know how to get there though. No ideas? Could spectrometer do something?
That's for people.
Yeah, that's for people, but it's going to be interacting with all this stuff. Like,
The same portal for.
The only remotely similar dashboard is the yardstick one that I recently
Yeah.
talked about on the integration call. That's OPNFV's thing, but it's doing the same idea where it
are
collects.
they hitting Jenkins?
I don't know. I don't know the details, but it's doing. I mean, the idea is that it collects stats like this.
Yeah, we need some idea for this. This is already the second release that we are talking about the same thing,
Yep.
and we have done nothing.
Jan had something from Cisco that he showed us that we were going to get from him, and it didn't happen. So we can reach out there again, I don't know.
Definitely, I know why this is the problem, because we have a requirement, integration test people, but we are not expert in dashboard or GUIs or
Right.
this kind of stuff. We definitely need some help. And I don't know who in the community can have this kind of skills. But we need to figure it out.
Okay. We'll look closer at yardstick. That's the only tangible thing I have right now. All right.
Before you get off that subject, Jamo, presumably other people here are interested in integration and testing, and since we have just hit like 4 or 5 things in a row where we're like, we need someone to work on this, is anyone interested in dashboards, for example, and creating test dashboards? And in general, feel free to speak up if we talk about something that you want to work on, and come yank the mic from us in general for whatever.
If you develop nice dashboards, then people will look at that instead of looking at the Jenkins queues.
Yeah. Yes.
That was awesome.
And we talked about this point last forum too. So that graph on the right shows how long a job takes overall, and then that line towards the bottom is actually how long the tests are running. So it's like 2 to 1. And this is one of our beefier tests. It's open flow, and it's like several hundred test cases. So we have test cases that are 3, and it takes 30 seconds to run, and we're still spending 12 minutes spinning up VMs and waiting for JClouds probably. So node pool is going to solve all our problems. So. We could think of other tricks.
Well, so one of the things that you're seeing with your jobs taking so long is obviously JClouds. Because when you fire up the job, okay, you have to wait until the job starts. That's the start of your timer, actually. And then you have to wait until all of your slave VMs come online if it's a lab, right? So you obviously have that window of, I need all these systems online before my test can start. Node pool will solve that.
Okay.
What'll end up happening is you won't even be able to start the execution of your job. Your timer technically won't start until a system is actually available for you, and that system will have the entire lab already available.
Okay.
So you won't see that wait time for all the resources to come online. What you'll see is a wait time in the queue, the Zool queue,
Longer.
queue for when it starts. But you already see that anyway. Right now it's the Jenkins queue.
Yeah. Okay, so node pool solving all of our problems today. Yeah, and then like I don't know what the heck happened on that yellow bar there, but that was like an hour or something for a 5-minute test, I think. Cool. Oh, that's it. Oh, no, it's not. Distribution analysis. Okay. Lewis, what's that first one?
Yeah, these are some of the issues we have seen over release. Like the first one is clear, no? Breaking the distribution is very annoying. But hopefully now we have a job running in the verify that will fix this.
So we have a verified job that will
Yes.
catch this before it's merged?
Yes.
Okay.
We just need to figure out we can do the same as auto-release. It's only because of the POM file change that we might break. Maybe there's some more stuff, but at least today is working every time. So if someone breaks, we know. And that never gets merged. Confusion around test features.
So yeah, what is compatible with
Well,
all?
this is a problem since the beginning, when we started Karaf and defining feature. We were not very precise to tell project how to name features. And actually, we did bad in the beginning to ask projects to call things like feature all or thing that doesn't mean anything to users. And but we are fixing that. The problem is that today, to my knowledge, there is not really... I remember there is some wiki documentation on how to name your features. Probably we need to review that because exactly nobody knows. If there is something, nobody knows. Yeah, best practice or something.
Okay.
But do you think people are looking at that? I'm not sure. And we never pay attention, no, because this is something that projects do, and then that's it. They document their features, and nobody is really, oh, this feature, can you review your name or change your name because it doesn't look.
Well, so what are you telling the world if you put your feature in compatible with all?
Well, and that's another thing, that the integration feature themselves. You mean
Yeah.
that's the issue?
I mean, well, yeah, I don't even really know what it means. I kind of,
it historically meant that like you don't conflict with this other body of features.
right.
This test feature, I'm concerned, but not as much as the user features, because this is used only internally for testing, right? I don't think anybody is supposed to use these features other than for testing. So based on that, yeah, we need to understand the test people, we need to understand what this means. But it's not like everybody needs to know what is this, because normal people, they don't use it, right? Or what's your point?
I just, when someone emails me and asks, like, should I be incompatible with all? I'm like, I don't know. Like, yeah,
Well,
until it breaks.
in your case, yes, you should give an answer if someone asks that compatible with all means when you want to do a test with a lot of features, these are features that are not disrupting, they are not interfering, they are not, you can test with them, and your application should work well with all these features loaded and running. That's
So-
the definition of compatible all when we started with this.
So then does OVSDB need an all job because they're not in the compatible with all features?
So in theory, yes. So any project needs to run with all the compatible all, even if it is not. So you can be compatible or not compatible. But in either case, you have to have some tests that test with all that is compatible, for the only reason that you want to test with more things that not just your feature. That's the only reason for
Okay.
this test.
Okay.
This test was before in continuous integration. After merge, we decided to put it in daily, sort
Yeah.
of, because it was not really.
It finds problems. I mean, we notice the cluster jobs
Yeah.
don't work when they're run with all the features
Yeah,
for
it
some
finds
reason.
trouble sometime.
Okay.
Yeah. So probably we need to keep it, but it's imperfect test, because if you are not a compatible feature, for instance, you are not being tested with other features, basically. So that the price, if you have a feature that is not compatible, you pay the price that, yeah, you are testing yourself with all the feature, but the other people are not testing with you.
Right. Okay.
Which, could be, yeah. Anyway.
Okay. It is just confusing, so I put it on here.
So I was wondering, not with regards to compatible with all, but the stuff you were saying earlier about feature naming and so on. You've mentioned a couple of times in the past the idea of moving feature definitions to integration distribution or something else instead of having them all in individual projects. Wouldn't that help? Well, this came up in the context of dependencies and stuff like that, but it seems to me it would help in this case too, because then the reviewers would be integration distribution people and not the individual project
And
people.
we would have a better picture, ballpark picture of the whole thing. Yeah.
Technically, what's possible is a very good idea.
Is
but
it?
I'm not sure this is technically possible for the way the way you define a feature today. Well, there is something actually we can do. Technically, what is possible is that you can define in integration a username feature, like very cool name, and that calls something that is in a project with a very ugly name or nobody understands what that means. So that is possible actually. What is not possible is the feature definition itself normally contains bundles and contains also the config system, the config files. So this information is only project know about that. So integration we don't know. But I'm thinking about the second thing, that we could define a feature integration that calls some other feature. That is easy to do, very easy to do. And at some point, maybe it makes sense to hide that. Like project, you can do any feature that you want, but then some people in integration will call this feature with a good name.
Yeah, can we hide projects? Features will be hidden.
Totally.
And then only the visible features will be defined.
Only
by
the visible feature,
distribution
something
team.
like that. We can think about it,
Okay.
but definitely, technically, yes, it's possible, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and this could fit in with the, not right now, but the sort of future work around stable features and having the equivalent of a mature project, but for a feature, and we can put, they've done clustering test and performance test and expose this group with a preference, right? We can say, here's what users would normally see, and then you can load an extended feature set if you are interested in less robust features that you need for your use case or something. In the future, those two ideas can mesh well together.
Yeah, that gave me the idea and integrate that I had before. The integration team can also build distributions. Like if I need a distribution for OpenFV with 3-4 features that I know is needed, we could in integration build that all the way. I mean, create the feature that for OpenFV or for any other downstream project or any use case that we consider important, we could do that. That is the right place to do it, definitely the integration distribution, the right place to do it. This feature will bring whatever the downstream needs, and you get that all the way. You don't need to type ODL, one by one, all the features.
Yeah. Cool. One thing, I don't see it on here. We are shipping tools now in our distribution, and not just the distribution. And so that kind of bothers me. It didn't bother me when we first did it, but it does now. So we have a script that will configure clustering that we ship with the distribution. It's great and it works, but how do we know that it works? Is it going to work for boron? We have nobody actively testing it. It's not under system test control. It's not. So I think we need a policy around that. We can't just give end users random scripts that people wrote.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that a little bit. Like an ODL user really, what would like to have in the distribution? Like, of course, I would like to have some tools there that I don't need to go and graph on any other place. But we need to think about what kind of tool are really useful for the user, and also because it's part of the distribution, it has to have the same kind of requirement that are, I mean, if a project is in the distribution, the less is that you have a minimum test, you have to have some documentation. So this kind of requirement needs to apply to whatever we put in the distribution.
Totally, yeah.
So for this particular script or other script, we need to make sure that that happens before we, I'm not sure if merging the code, because we allow the experimental feature. I don't know if we allow experimental scripts in the same way.
Because we're going to forget about it. And, in a year from now, the new distribution won't work with this fancy tool we had a year ago, and it's just going to look stupid.
Yeah,
so
that happened. We have already an example from Helium Thanh, I remember. So someone did some cool kind of portal or something to select features or to build your distribution based on feature. But then these people, they were not available anymore, and that stayed for 2 releases in the distribution. Nobody was maintaining that. And finally, we removed it because it's...
So let's put up some kind of rules or policy in place, and then the committers on distribution have to be...
Let's put some rules, and then if that rules fulfilled, then we can... I'm okay to have the script and useful stuff in the distribution. I think it's a good idea.
It needs to be tested somehow. It needs to have documentation, and
Yeah, we basically just need to teach it like a project, treat it like a project, right? It's the same requirements for being in the distribution as a project. I would also, parallel to this idea, there are certain things that we may want to include in the distribution that we're not right now. Like, for example, the systemd.service file for Open Daylight that we ship with the RPM and stuff. We currently are pulling that from the integration packaging repo when we build, but it would make sense to, I think, include in the tarball. So I guess that's not a tool, but it would need to somehow fit into this idea around getting the right type of documentation reviewed. And so as we think about this, we basically need to just formalize for maybe non-tool things too that we want to include in the distribution. But
or we take it out and we put it in a test repo under tools. That's the other option. But it's what the customer gets, right? So we got to make sure.
I mean, the integration repository is always there. It can be used anytime. So whatever. I'm just thinking if something is more easy for a user if it is in the distribution. That's it.
Okay. The last bullet point, I just noticed looking at some test jobs that some projects require root privileges to run the controller to get things to work. Is that all right? I mean, I'm assuming that's okay.
Really? I didn't know that.
For example, SNMP, I think, tries to bind to a privileged port, 514 or something, whatever it is.
Obviously, you can't bind to a privileged port unless you're root.
Right.
You just can't do that. But if there are things that are that require root that aren't requiring root because who knows why, but they aren't actually requiring privileges,
Right.
they should not be.
So I think that's the only example I found was the project binding to a privileged port.
Okay. If that's the reason they're requiring root, then that's a valid reason.
Okay, then we're good. I just noticed it.
I think we should make sure it's documented.
Yeah, actually, there's one project that just breaks and doesn't work, and I think SNMP is the good one. It tries 514 or 41, I forget, and then if that doesn't work, it bumps up the number to some unprivileged port that it will use. So that's fine. That's even smart. But the other project just didn't work. I forget what it was. Okay, so we have action items. This is it. That's all I have. We have some. I took some notes on the Etherpad. We'll put it in Trello and we'll get node pull in a month, right? Starting. What is it? 1st of April. April 1st. Yeah, we'll get an email. April Fools. What's up?
Is there a plan to make maybe weekly releases? Because as a company, we use Open Daylight, and to be dependent on snapshots is pretty problematic. So basically what we do is wait until the GA or the service release is out and only then start the integration. It's a very long way to wait for the new release. Instead of weekly have something partial stable, at least being compiled. That's the basic
I think he
thing.
has an answer.
Sure. Yeah, so auto release actually does produce a daily build. And if it's successful, there is a staging repo that you can download directly from, and there'll be a proper release build, but we don't advertise it. It's just, we build it nightly. Yeah, it's a fixed version. So you can download that. So if you watch the auto release job for, like, if you're interested in Beryllium, then every night there's an auto release Beryllium build that runs. It currently lives for 60 days. So after 60 days, it will get cleared from Nexus.
And it triggers the system test, so you could go look and see, like, did it fail everything? Like, I'm not taking it.
Right. Yeah, and currently that's what OPNFE uses for their, when they need to test the next release that it's not out yet, right?
Yeah, I was going to say we're integration packaging is consuming that auto release build. We started doing this like pretty recently, so it makes sense that you hadn't seen it. But early December or something.
Yeah.
It's a
And
good thing. I mean, it's a good feature. We basically, back at Helium, stopped using the snapshot because it didn't build.
yeah, people use snapshots for a long time, but it was not ever recommended. But
Yeah. So maybe if you can formalize it, even maybe leave a weekly release for longer time till the end of the release, could be very helpful.
so one thing about all of these or many of these auto release jobs is that we're not all of them right now, but many of them we're packaging up into RPMs as well, and then building those in the CentOS community build system. And those do stick around for a long time. And so the answer from the OPNFE projects that wanted to stick around so far that we've been giving is to pull RPMs instead of auto release jobs, and those will be forever.
But if we have a project that is dependent on... we have projects that are dependent on bundles,
Right.
not RPMs.
Yeah, then you would want this mechanism from Thanh.
Yeah, they are different.
Cool.
Thanks.
But it definitely sounds like we need to document it better. I think we were aware of that, but just hadn't really put it on our to-do list. So let's raise a Trello card for that.
Any other questions?
I think there was a huge improvement this release with regard to auto release and distribution check. Because before what happened is that in the master was always breaking either or. So to have a daily was even very difficult to achieve that. But nowadays I think that problem.
Just to clarify, the daily auto release only publishes if the system, I'm just questioning, the daily auto release only publishes if it passes the system test?
No.
No, it publishes if the build was successful. So if auto release was able to successfully complete a build, it publishes a staging repo. But that staging repo is not advertised to the world. It's just you have to know it's there. So there's a URL you can check daily and see that it added a new entry. And then if that new entry is there, you can start consuming it.
Okay, so So if I'm this type of customer who wants a stable, recent build of the,
How do you know it's stable?
they'll want to correlate that artifact with the system test results that go along with it?
Yeah, you can look at the tests that were run based on that distribution, and they might have all aborted and failed, or they might have passed a little bit. So it would be cool if we could like rubber stamp the distribution after the system test run as like, okay, this is decent or not.
So there is an item there for CSIT test that today we have a big issue that test is not stable and we don't label it. So because of that, any attempt to test a patch or to test a distribution like we try to do now,
You don't get a good idea.
it's very difficult.
I'm just talking off the top of my head here. No, it's not node pool. So the staging repos have the ability to be dropped. That's actually part of what they're designed for. Since we trigger the integration tests after the build happens for these dailies, it would be possible if we had those specific jobs flagged so that they could drop the staging repository if they fail. So that way, the only ones that would be in the system would be passing.
Except right now, it will fail every time. We need to get that fixed, but that's a great idea. We should. So then they know they got that's the last one available is good.
Wouldn't it be better to copy it to some other repository if it succeeds? Because otherwise, if the build fails and there's something you want to look at that was only in the failure, that was only in the staging repository, you need the staging repository to figure out what went wrong.
That's fair.
A different staging repository, yes. So yes, we could promote instead of promoting to, because right now the way our staging repositories are configured is that if they were to be promoted, they'd be promoted all the way to production. But we could promote to another staging repository. So jobs pass, promote this to next level of staging. So stable build or stable daily or something like that.
Yeah, all the plus ones to that. That sounds like a fairly easy thing to implement that could get some pretty serious usability results.
Can we detect a regression with our system tests? Like, no, like okay, it's got 12 failures every time, and now all of a sudden it's got 13. So something is different and broken. Instead of just saying it pass or fail.
This is very annoying, to be honest.
Node pool.
And I start to think that, you know, maybe it's something to exaggerate it, but at some point, remove those tests that are not stable from the distribution tests. Like maybe we stay with 3 tests only, and we say we can only test 3 contribution in the distribution from 40. But that is even better than having an unstable output that you don't know. Basically, you have to see an historic to understand what's going on.
All right.
I mean, it's too dramatic, but I mean, it's true. It's getting to a point that is not useful anymore.
But we're going to fight for that this release, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. But if we get at the end of Boron, maybe all these system tests will be caught up.
So is it possible to have the robot jobs vote or not vote? So basically, so you can have experimental jobs that don't vote on the final success or failure of the job itself?
Yeah. You can look at the graph. If it's a steady line, then it's expected.
So what I'm asking here is if you could flag a specific test as under experiment, don't count the vote.
Yeah, that's what we were trying to do. That's the idea.
And then you basically need to have that, have the job itself determined. Okay, did any of the ones that actually count fail? If then they failed, then obviously fail the build or fail the test job.
So I think the last idea that I heard Jamo on this is whatever test we have in a stable is not run it for sure in the distribution test. Like you can run some other environment, but in another situation, but not even with the bugs. We said maybe we run to see there are bugs that are already there or not. Mm-hmm. But still, we need to wait to pass. Like even when something that is bug, is suspected bug fails, you need to pass the test. So that's something we need to see mechanically how to do it.
Well, we'll talk about this tomorrow for sure, but
Yeah.
maybe we can start like you're saying, and we have good tests that we expect to pass every time.
Yeah.
Those now are part of auto release, and only those, and then we just build that up over time.
That I think we need
And
to
then
start
you-
to
then-
something that is stable already and we know what's going on.
Auto release is good. It passed all of our system tests are 100% pass, and,
Yeah.
and we'll just add more as we get.
I would like to see that situation as soon as possible, even if it is a few set of
Yeah,
tests.
okay.
But at least stable.
We can do that right away.
At least stable.
Okay. Anything else, guys?
Anything else from anybody else?
Venkat, you are very shy, Venkat. Say something? Venkat is a very active contributor, so probably he has some ideas.
Oh yeah, how do we get? Node pool's going to solve this. I know it. We want another NIC on the VMs. Go ahead.
We wanted additional NIC interface in the VMs for testing OpenStack.
Node pool in 1 month. You're on the hook. Cool. All right, I know our time's up, but. Exactly. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Or what was it? Certain types of changes don't trigger everything.
So my most recent learn was for Maven sites. So I think it was Maven sites. So like oh no, auto release.
Auto release.
So it because auto release testing only makes sense if the POM changed. If you only change code, then there's no value running auto release because it's checking to see if your versions are in line. But if you only changed code, there's no versions to check. So.
Well, I think for now, let's just take the CSIT jobs and get rid of anything that's not one offset beneath it. Like NIC,
Right.
we're not going to trigger off Yang tools.
Right.
And we'll just go
Or
through,
the-
and that'll help right away.
So another thing we could potentially do is pick a few projects from each offset, right? Like if ODL parent merges and we want to make sure that it goes all the way down, maybe the right thing is just say like maybe we'll test 4 or 5 projects in 1, 2, and we probably have to think of that. I don't know any offhand, but I would imagine there would be pretty decent ones to try, right?
Okay. We got something to do. That's good. And I wrote it down so you can do it.
Yeah, and same with the CSIT ones, right? Like
That's
like,
really
we
what I
don't
would
need to trigger 60 CSIT jobs.
Right. Right. Yeah, we got to fix that. So,
Yeah.
Jenkins is unresponsive. Node pool's fixing that. Zool's fixing that. How's that? We just want to talk about what we saw and experienced during the Beryllium release as far as the infrastructure went, system tests, and the distribution. So I'm counting on these guys to help me out here. So there you go.
The tough questions.
Yeah, and this needs to be a discussion because we had problems and we want to fix the problems. So I can't see that very well. The high level items that we experienced, we had long job queues. We had unresponsiveness. There's lots of IRCs to Thanh, like, hey, Jenkins is down. And it's hard to track. This is one of Lewis's bullet points, right? So we want to be able to track a job failure all the way back down to the merge that created the problem. And it's not so easy. Another thing we had to deal with was the software we run on these VMs. It's constantly changing and they're requesting new software, and we end up with extra VMs and more maintenance for the Linux Foundation folks. We need a better way to do that. One good example is OVS. We have version 2.0 that we want 2.4 sometimes, or 2.3 sometimes. And then we had just problems on Rackspace side, right? So they had bugs. I know Thanh was on the phone a lot with them, so maybe the private cloud or whatever is going to fix that. So what are we doing about these things? Like the long job queue, is that fixed by Zool and Nodepol?
Yes and no.
What are we going to do? Where's my mouse? I'm going to try to take notes while we talk. I know one problem is we trigger CSIT jobs which use a lot of resources on every patch that gets merged, right? Even on Yang tools, and we're triggering an OpenFlow plugin job. Like, do we need to do that?
The biggest ones are like ODL parent, Yang tools, MDSAL, and controller, because every project depends on all of those. And at the moment, when any of those projects merge a patch, 80 jobs get viewed.
Yeah.
For every merge, right? So if someone merges 5 patches, we easily get several hundred.
But we can't scale that, right? So we got to stop.
So we need to decide more smartly which project should actually trigger. So like for example, the integration job. Do we really need 50 projects to report that ODL parent merge broke the world?
Yeah, right. No.
Maybe we can pick like 3 or 4. Stop with the first one. Yeah, or maybe just build the offset 1 projects and then.
So yeah, by offset, I think we talked about that. So we're not going to trigger offset 3 projects on Yang tools.
Yeah.
And so,
I think, yeah.
oh, there you go. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
So, well, that requires us to go through each JJB folder and figure out who's doing what and where, and there's no easy way, right? Just work.
So the easy way is probably offset, no? That you said, starting with offsets.
Yeah. So for example, like if ODL parent merges, then we only. Well, it'll help quite a bit.
Okay, because we're not going to be looking at Jenkins anymore, right? Most of us.
Yeah.
I probably will, but. Okay, so nothing to do there. Difficult to track resources. Louis, did you want to talk about that?
That's probably something we can improve with the Zool, right? We can control more dashboard resources. This is more like infra utilization, no? That we don't know. I don't know you guys as an internal, understanding of what are the resources in use. But externally, there is no really metrics for that you can see, right?
Yeah, I want to see a job just failed right now, and I want to be able very quickly to find out it was.
Well, that's another issue.
A patch in.
See, you see there, 0.3 is more like when you have continuous integration, you want to monitor your resources, VMs, CPUs, and that visibility, at least the normal user, we don't have. And the other one is, point number 4 is actually all the control of the CI sequence from the merge to all the tests that are happening after. It's very difficult to go and track things forward and backwards. Like when you see an error in a test, what was the patch that caused this error? Or the other way around. I mean, some people want to test a patch or merge a patch. I mean, what are all the tests that are done after this? And make sure that they are all passing. They're very difficult to track these things. There is something called the patch, what is that? Patch test job.
Yep.
So that's when you have more control because it's holding. You have a main job that is not finishing until you run all the tests. And at the end,
We build offset 0 projects, and then if they don't build, obviously the other projects probably won't, right? And for example, if an offset 1 project merges, then maybe we only test other offset 1 projects that depend on that one, and so forth down the chain.
But you're saying in a happy path, we're triggering even offset 3 on Yang tools?
So today, if Yang tools merges,
Controller.
it triggers controller MDSAL, and
now.
then it goes all the way down the chain.
But are we saying to stop doing that, or are we saying be smarter about only trigger if we succeed?
What I mean is like only trigger, for example, if Yang tools merges, then we'll only trigger like a few other projects,
Right.
rather than the entire world.
And then we're done, okay.
Because we don't need the entire world to figure out if something broke the build, right? Like
Okay.
only a few projects breaking obviously would probably mean other projects broke too.
All right.
Yeah, but to be sure of the patch, you need to build everything. I mean,
Right, and
there are cases where an ODL parent change. Yeah. There are cases where an ODL parent change will break something for a few projects on offset 2. So if you stop at offset 0, you won't see that. But maybe we can do build offset 0. If that works, then build offset 1. And if that works, build offset 2. But in most cases, that still means you'll build everything.
Yeah.
So it doesn't fix anything. But wasn't there something that you changed recently where documentation changes